Ma'am, economy is in the back. Executive class is reserved for paying passengers. The words cut through the cabin like a blade. Conversations paused, glasses of champagne frozen mid-air. In seat 4A, an elegant black woman in a tailored blazer looked up calmly, her dark eyes unblinking. Around her, businessmen smirked, a flight attendant crossed her arms, and passengers whispered assumptions. What no one knew was that she wasn't in the wrong seat. She wasn't in the wrong class. She was the reason this flight existed at all. Ma'am, economy is in the back. Executive class is reserved for paying passengers. The words cut through the cabin like a blade. Conversations paused, glasses of champagne frozen mid-air. In seat 4A, an elegant black woman in a tailored blazer looked up calmly, her dark eyes unblinking. Around her, businessmen smirked, a flight attendant crossed her arms, and passengers whispered assumptions. What no one knew was that she wasn't in the wrong seat. She wasn't in the wrong class. She was the reason this flight existed at all. The cabin lights dimmed as boarding continued. Glasses clinked softly, newspapers rustled, and the low murmur of conversations filled the executive cabin. Vanessa sat quietly, scrolling through her tablet, when a shadow fell across her. The same flight attendant who had checked her ticket now stood over her seat, arms crossed, voice firm enough for nearby passengers to hear. Ma'am, I think you may be in the wrong section. Executive class is reserved for ticketed passengers only. Economy is behind the curtain. A pause rippled through the cabin. Heads turned. Seatmates leaned in to listen. The businessman in 3B smirked into his glass of whiskey, whispering to his neighbor. Knew it. She doesn't belong here. Vanessa didn't flinch. She placed her tablet gently on the tray table and looked up. Her voice was calm, measured. I have a ticket. Seat 4A. The attendant frowned, holding out her hand. May I see it again? Vanessa retrieved the boarding pass from her blazer and handed it over. The attendant studied it with exaggerated suspicion, as though examining counterfeit money. When she finally slapped it back onto Vanessa's chest, the sound echoed louder than it should have. Don't try to sit where you don't belong, ma'am. Gasps fluttered through the cabin. A few passengers shook their heads. One elderly woman in 5C whispered to her husband, they always try things like this. Phones appeared. A businessman angled his camera discreetly toward the scene, his lips curling into a satisfied smile. Vanessa adjusted the boarding pass back into her blazer pocket, her expression steady, her silence louder than protest. Her restraint only fueled the spectacle. To everyone else, it looked like confirmation of guilt. But to Vanessa Carter, it was the beginning of something else entirely. The aisle grew congested as late passengers boarded, forced to squeeze past the scene unfolding in executive class. Whispers traveled faster than the line itself. By now, nearly every seat in the cabin had a phone angled discreetly toward Dr. Vanessa Carter in 4A. The attendant's voice sharpened. Ma'am, I need you to stand up and move to economy so we can continue boarding. Vanessa remained still, hands folded neatly over her lap. Her tone was calm, even gentle, yet carried the weight of a movable stone. This is my seat. Seat 4A. Paid in full. The businessman in 3B chuckled, loud enough for all to hear. She's stalling. Just drag her out so we can leave. His seatmate laughed nervously, nodding in agreement. The attendant tapped her headset, speaking into the small mic, security to gate 12. We have a passenger refusing to comply. A murmur swept through the cabin. Refusing to comply. The phrase landed heavy, transforming whispers into judgment. The elderly woman in 5C clutched her pearls. A younger man muttered, "Entitlement at its finest." Still, Vanessa did not move. She adjusted the sleeve of her blazer, a flash of a platinum watch catching the overhead light. She opened her tablet again, scrolling with unhurried precision, as though the chaos around her had nothing to do with her. The restraint was unnerving. The calmness in her silence felt louder than shouting. When 2 security officers finally boarded, their heavy steps echoing on the narrow jet bridge, the atmosphere shifted from discomfort to spectacle. Passengers craned their necks, phones raised higher. "Ma'am," one officer said firmly, "you'll need to come with us." Vanessa lifted her gaze slowly, meeting his eyes. Her voice was low, deliberate, unshaken. "I am not leaving this seat. Because this seat belongs to me." The words hung in the air, resonant and immovable. For the first time, doubt flickered in the officer's eyes. Around the cabin, a strange current shifted, just slightly. Some passengers still jeered, but others grew uneasy, recognizing the disproportion of it all. What they didn't know, what none of them yet realized, was that Vanessa Carter wasn't simply defending a ticket. She was defending a truth that would soon collapse the arrogance of the entire cabin. The aisle was frozen, every eye fixed on the woman in 4A. 2 security officers loomed beside her, the flight attendant practically glowing with anticipation, convinced that vindication was moments away. Vanessa Carter closed her tablet with slow precision and set it aside. Then, reaching into the inner pocket of her blazer, she withdrew a small, black leather case. The cabin went quiet, the only sound the hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power. With deliberate calm, she extracted a card and placed it face down on the tray table. Her manicured fingers rested on top of it, as though guarding a secret that weighed more than the entire aircraft. "Before you attempt to remove me," she said, her voice soft but carrying through the cabin, "I suggest you read this." The lead officer hesitated. Passengers leaned forward. Phones zoomed in. Finally, Vanessa lifted her hand, revealing the gold-embossed letters across the card. Carter Global Aviation. Dr. Vanessa Carter, Founder and Chief Executive Officer. A ripple of gasps swept through the cabin. The businessman in 3B, who had been smirking since boarding, leaned closer, his face draining of color as he read the name aloud for his live stream audience. She owns Carter Global. They build the engines on these planes. The flight attendant's smile collapsed. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The officer glanced at the card, then at Vanessa. "Ma'am, you're—" "Yes," Vanessa interrupted calmly. "I am the CEO of Carter Global Aviation, the company that manufactures the jet engines keeping this aircraft in the sky. This airline's fleet depends on my contracts. And yet here I am, accused of stealing a seat I purchased." Silence pressed down on the cabin like gravity. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade. A young woman in 6A whispered, "Oh my God." An older man muttered under his breath, "What have we done?" Vanessa folded her hands neatly, her expression unshaken. "So now, officers, tell me again, whose seat is this?" The revelation landed like a thunderclap. The humiliation had turned into absolute authority. And in that instant, everyone in the cabin understood, this was no ordinary passenger. This was the woman who owned the sky they were flying in. The cabin was suffocating in its silence. 2 security officers loomed, their presence heavy, the flight attendant's eyes flashing with triumph as if justice, her version of it, was about to be served. Passengers leaned forward, cameras steady, eager for a scene they could consume and share. But Dr. Vanessa Carter did not rise. She did not plead. Instead, She reached into her blazer with the unhurried grace of someone who had no need to justify herself to anyone. From within, she pulled a slim black leather case and set it on the tray table. The soft click as it opened seemed louder than the murmur of the engines. She withdrew a single card, thick, black, with letters pressed in gold foil. She placed it face down on the table, her hand resting on top, her eyes never leaving the officer standing before her. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the air like steel. "Before you attempt to remove me, you should understand who I am." The officer hesitated, his authority suddenly uncertain. The passengers, who only moments earlier had whispered accusations, held their breath. Vanessa lifted her hand. The card gleamed under the cabin lights. Carter Global Aviation. Dr. Vanessa Carter, founder and chief executive officer. Gasps broke the silence. A sharp intake of breath from the woman in 5C. A muttered curse from a young man in 2D. Even the businessman in 3B, who had smirked through every moment, went pale, his phone lowering slightly as though the device itself had betrayed him. He whispered, almost involuntarily, to his live stream, "Carter Global. She owns the company that builds these engines. Without her, this plane wouldn't even fly." The revelation spread like fire. Passengers craned their necks to see the name again, some fumbling to zoom in, others whispering what they knew. Carter Global was one of the largest aviation firms in the United States. Contracts with Boeing, Airbus, and half the major airlines in North America. Billions of dollars in assets. A company whose name meant power in the skies. And the woman they had mocked, dismissed, and accused of theft was the one signing those contracts. The flight attendant's face drained of color. Her lips moved soundlessly, as though she wanted to apologize, but the words caught in her throat. The lead officer swallowed hard. "Ma'am, you're—" "Yes," Vanessa said, her voice steady, unshaken. "I am the founder and CEO of Carter Global Aviation. The very engines keeping this aircraft in the air bear my company's name. And yet, here I sit, treated like an intruder for daring to occupy the seat I purchased." Her gaze swept the cabin, at the passengers who had laughed, at the ones who had stayed silent, and at those few whose eyes now glistened with shame. "Look around you," she continued, her voice low but resonant. "Every one of you was ready to believe the worst. Not because I lacked a ticket, not because I lacked the means, but because you could not imagine someone who looks like me belonging here." Her words landed heavier than the revelation itself. A quiet sob came from the young Latina woman in 6A, her hand covering her mouth. The man in 4C, who had stayed silent until now, whispered hoarsely, "God forgive us." The cabin, once filled with judgment and mockery, now bowed under the crushing weight of its own prejudice. Vanessa leaned back, her presence radiating not arrogance, but a dignity so unshakable it seemed to fill every corner of the aircraft. "So now," she said finally, her tone like tempered steel, "tell me again, officers, whose seat is this?" The lead officer's jaw tightened, his authority shattered. Around him, dozens of passengers shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their phones, others looking away. And in that silence, everyone knew the truth. She wasn't just in the right seat. She was the reason the seat, and the flight itself, existed. The air inside the cabin was thick, not with tension anymore, but with shame. Passengers who had smirked now shifted in their seats, suddenly fascinated with their seatbelts or their champagne flutes. Phones lowered, some screens going dark as though erasing their complicity. The lead officer cleared his throat, but the authority in his voice was gone. "Dr. Carter, I sincerely apologize. There's clearly been a mistake." Vanessa Carter didn't move, her expression as calm as it had been from the moment she boarded. She let the silence stretch, let the weight of her words from moments before linger in the minds of everyone watching. Finally, she spoke. "A mistake," she said softly, her gaze steady. "This wasn't a mistake. It was a reflex. A reflex built on years of assuming that women like me do not belong in seats like this. A reflex you've allowed to become policy, wrapped in procedure, and excused as routine." Her words cut deeper than the gold letters on her card. The businessman in 3B swallowed hard, his earlier smugness collapsed into guilt. The elderly woman in 5C bowed her head, whispering something only her husband could hear. At that moment, the captain himself appeared in the cabin doorway, silver stripes glinting on his shoulders. His eyes flicked to the card still gleaming on Vanessa's tray table, and recognition spread across his face like a shadow. He knew exactly who she was. "Dr. Carter," he said, his voice taut with humility, "on behalf of this crew and this airline, I offer you our deepest apologies. What you've endured is unacceptable." Vanessa studied him for a long moment. Then she rose slowly from her seat, not in anger, not in triumph, but in measured dignity. I followed her. "This isn't about me," she said, her voice filling the cabin. "I'll land in New York, attend my meetings, and return to my life unchanged. But what about the next woman? The next man? The next child told they don't belong where they rightfully are? Who will defend them when no one knows their name?" Her words reverberated through the cabin like thunder. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, others blinked back tears. The young Latina woman in 6A whispered, "Amen." Vanessa's gaze swept over the passengers, then settled on the captain. "If this airline is serious about change, then I expect more than apologies. I expect reform. Mandatory bias training for every crew member. Clear protocols to prevent profiling. And accountability when those standards are broken. Anything less is just another promise that will be forgotten once the plane lands." The captain nodded slowly, visibly shaken. "You have my word, Dr. Carter. This will be brought directly to the board." Vanessa's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Good. Because I'll be at that board meeting. And I don't intend to sit quietly." Gasps filled the cabin again, softer this time, carrying awe instead of scorn. Phones rose once more, but now the captions would be different. Not fraud or entitlement, but power, justice, change. Vanessa returned to her seat, her posture regal, her presence unshaken. The hum of the engines grew louder, as though the aircraft itself was eager to carry her forward. The flight took off, but something larger had already lifted, a standard, a demand, a truth too heavy to be ignored. For the rest of the journey, no one dared question whether Vanessa Carter belonged in executive class. They knew. And deep down, they also knew, because of her, the skies would never feel the same again.